I've actually designed toilets before. Even toilets were actually kind of interesting to me while I was doing them. You know, it's maybe not something that I would want to do for, 5 or 10 years, but for a couple months, it was actually kind of interesting to really get into the nitty-gritty of what makes a good toilet. Okay, so once again, there are 7 main questions here. And the first one is that industrial design is a fairly uncommon field. How did you learn about it, or how did you discover it? I come from a background of designers. My mother actually was an interior designer, and my brother, who was 8 years older than me, actually studied industrial design at Rhode Island School of Design. So he ended up going into game design in the end, but he was kind of my inspiration for getting into the field in the first place. More specifically, I often would create a lot of things as a kid. You know, I loved Legos. I had this giant, 10-foot long space station made entirely out of Legos. I would build things constantly out of wood. I built and shaped my own surfboards. I was always just building stuff as a kid, and industrial design just sort of seemed like the right field to go in with that sort of inclination. The next question is, how do you explain your job to those who don't know about industrial design? If I'm speaking to somebody at a party or where my job is not really of any consequence to the conversation, I will tell them what I do. I'll tell them I'm an industrial designer, but I usually don't go into detail and I change the subject just because it's not very interesting to a lot of people, so I tend to stay away from it. So what I'll often say is that industrial design is essentially architecture for smaller products. Things like, I don't know, desk fans, cameras, computer monitors, microphones, or lighting, whatever else you can pretty much think of that is mass-produced. So the next question is, what inspirations have developed your industrial design style? I tend not to inject my own sort of personal biases into my projects. I don't like to do that because a company is paying me to make something that's appealing to their customers, not necessarily something that's appealing to me. So one thing that's important is this. If I'm designing, let's just say, an indoor security camera, all right? I'm just making something up off the top of my head. I'm designing an indoor security camera. The last thing that I want to do is look at other security cameras. The reason for that is you'll look on Google, you'll search Google Images or Pinterest or whatever, and you'll see a bunch of really beautiful designs. And what happens is you'll find something that you really like, inevitably, and you just won't be able to get that particular design out of your head. You'll take that design and just change 1 or 2 little lines a little bit and say, oh, it's my design now, when really that is not at all the case. So in the case of the security camera, what might I look at? I might look at some other things that feel very secure or strong or sturdy. Maybe I would look at padlocks in terms of products that I would look at. Maybe I would look at sort of peripheral security devices. Maybe I would look at other sorts of creatures in nature that have armor or safety as a major part of their physiology, things like that. But really it comes down to whatever it is that the customer is looking for. Now, with that said, as a person, it's hard for me to not have a little bit of myself in my work. Things change a little bit when you're dealing with personal projects, right? Or things that you're just doing for your own enjoyment. I tend to derive a lot of inspiration from my life experiences and from the other things that I do that are sort of outside of design. So I get a lot of inspiration from nature, and more specifically the ocean. I've lived by the beach for pretty much my entire life. In fact, directly to my right, I have somewhat of a partial ocean view. So I've been around the ocean my entire life, and I think that deeply informs my sort of design perspective without a doubt. So the next question is, which company would you love to design a product for? So once again, this is another thing where I don't have a strong preference. I think that what interests me more than a specific brand is working with a company that sort of shares my value in what good design is. So I'd love to work with a company who is really involved in designing the right thing and going through a rigorous sort of research process to really understand what is the problem that we're solving. I'd also like to work with companies that focus heavily on solving real problems that truly help people. So I've lately been working on a few more medical device designs as a result of that. The impact of a medical device design is huge on a person's life. So I really like doing that a lot. Anything that deals with, really beautiful sculptural forms, I think anybody in industrial design is going to be a sucker for, and I am no different. So in that regard, that's another thing that I would really like to work on. My interests are also pretty broad. So even the most sort of banal seeming project, like, I don't know, I've actually designed toilets before. Even toilets were actually kind of interesting to me while I was doing them. It's maybe not something that I would want to do for, 5 or 10 years, but for a couple months, it was actually kind of interesting to really get into the nitty-gritty of what makes a good toilet. If you can enjoy designing a toilet, I'm pretty sure that you can enjoy just about anything else. So the next question is, what is your go-to industrial design program and why? I don't know that I have one. I mean, the short answer is whichever program is going to do the job the best. It's like, you're not going to use a hammer to screw in a nail. You use a screwdriver, so it's the exact same thing. I don't know that I could say like, oh, I like screwdrivers or I like hammers the most. And it's the same thing with design software. With that said, what I find myself using most often is actually just hand sketching and just really, really crude, simple hand sketches. So I actually have some right here. I don't know. So like I do a lot of really, really crude, simple sketches like this for myself. That's a really common thing. Another thing that I'll do a lot is build a lot of very crude, simple prototypes. That's another thing that I do quite often. In terms of like 3D modeling software, I use Rhino quite a bit. I use Alias quite a bit. Alias is basically Rhino, but way better. So the next question is, what do you dislike most about industrial design and why? I think the hardest thing about industrial design is that what can often happen is you design a product and it just involves a lot of different disciplines, and the vision for the design or what the main intent of what the design is meant to do gets lost. Now, that can be avoided. You just have to be really, really vigilant about it and really shepherd that product through all the way to the end. Otherwise, there's really no guaranteeing or no telling what is going to happen to the final design. And I can tell you, sometimes it can get really ugly. Even with my own projects, I have seen things just really take a turn for the worst because I just really wasn't being vigilant about shepherding the product through that manufacturing process, which is very important. It's worth mentioning that there is sort of a silver lining to that. Because it takes so many people just to design very simple products, you work with a lot of really interesting, smart people that you otherwise would never connect with. So in that regard, it's really not that bad. It's just challenging, I guess I would say. I don't know if I'd say that I dislike it. I would just say that it's difficult. Okay, so the last question, what makes an industrial design good? I actually think it's pretty straightforward. A good industrial design fulfills the project brief. Now let's be a little bit more specific about that. Of course, there are times when the project brief is predicated on false assumptions. It's not accurate to what the customer actually wants. There's the 4 Ds of industrial design. I'll put it over here, but basically the first phase is to design the right thing. Make sure that you're designing the right product for the right user and solving the right problems. And then from there, it's designing the thing right. So does the product that you're designing fulfill the needs of the customer and the brief that you've written? So that's pretty much it. I actually think in that way, design is fairly straightforward. Now, of course, your interpretation of that brief can vary greatly. And I think one thing that can make an industrial design good is just solving that problem in a really novel way, solving it in an elegant way, making sure that it's beautiful, making sure that it's not an impediment on the person's daily interactions. It sort of just blends into the experience of using the product. I think all of those things are what make an industrial design good. Thank you guys for checking out this video. I hope you found it helpful. Please take the time to like and subscribe this video. It definitely gives me that little bit of extra encouragement, which I appreciate very much. I had 100 subscribers only about a month and a half ago, and now we're up to almost 700. So thank you guys for subscribing. I really, really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, and you guys are the best. If you guys have other questions, feel free to ask them. I'm available. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on LinkedIn, or connect with me on LinkedIn, whichever. And I hope you learned something.